still focus on the deliverables. It's really about how that work gets done in a manner that everybody feels is working and everyone's positive about.
What got you here won't keep you here, right? In this very fast-paced, dynamic condition in which we're all living and working.
What are we trying to get out? What are we trying to deliver? Is the quality at the right level? And making sure there's a space for that person to deliver that work.
I'm Dr. Amy Athey. As a licensed psychologist and performance expert, working with elite athletes, C-suite executives, and high performers operating in some of the most demanding environments, I've seen what it truly takes to perform when it matters most. From supporting members of the Naval Special Warfare community to advising leaders in high-stakes, high-pressure situations, one truth remains consistent. The tools that drive performance are the same. You prepare in a way that allows you to show up ready when the moment arrives. Each week, I'll share practical tools and insights to help you strengthen how you think, lead, and perform. Welcome to Still Evolving. Welcome back to Still Evolving. I'm Dr. Amy Athey. Before I bring in today's guest, I want to spend a few minutes on a piece of high performance that almost every leader I know underestimates, which is recovery. Recovery has a branding problem in executive culture. It tends to get heard of as a vacation, a long weekend away, or something you finally earn after you've grinded hard enough for long enough. That framing is why so few leaders actually use it well, because if recovery is something that lives at the end of a long siege, then most weeks it never arrives at all. The leaders who sustain high performance over time treat recovery very differently. They treat it as a built-in part of how the work gets done, woven into the day, the week, and in the quarter, rather than something they hope to schedule once the calendar finally clears. The frame I find most useful, and one that runs all the way through today's conversation, comes from sport. In athletics, no serious coach designs a training plan that is all volume and no recovery, because the body simply cannot adapt that way. Adaptation, which is another word for growth, happens in the recovery, not in the load. Push without recovery, and you do not get a stronger athlete. You get an injured one, or a flat one, or one who peaks too early and has nothing left when the moment that matter arrives. The same biology applies to executives, and the same principle applies to teams. The reason this gets missed so often in corporate settings is that the cost shows up later than the load does. So leaders mistake the absence of immediate breakdown for proof that the pace is sustainable, when really the bill is just being deferred. There is a name for that build, and it is worth knowing because once you can see it, you can manage it. The term is allostatic load, which refers to the cumulative wear and tear of our bodies carrying that chronic exposure to stress, and the toll it takes when the human stress response stays activated for too long without release. Our nervous system was built for short bursts of activation followed by recovery, not for a continuous current of low-grade stress that never gets discharged. The way recovery actually works on a biological level is that it allows us to downregulate, to come off the gas pedal of the sympathetic nervous system and engage the brake of the parasympathetic nervous system. Both are essential. The sympathetic nervous system is what helps us mobilize, focus, and perform under pressure. The parasympathetic nervous system is what allows us to rest, digest, repair, and absorb what we have just been through. After all, no one can drive a car safely without a brake, and yet that is exactly what most executives are attempting to do when they treat recovery as optional. The other piece worth naming is that recovery is not just one thing. It can be a full day of being unplugged, but it can also be a 15-minute walk between meetings, a half day reserved for one focused task, a real lunch away from the screen, a night of actual sleep, or a conversation with a friend that has nothing to do with work. The form matters less than the function, which is to give your system enough space to absorb what it has been through so that it can deliver what comes next. The leaders who do this well are honest with themselves about what they actually need, and they build it into the calendar before the calendar fills up around them. The leaders who do not do it well wait until their body or their mood or their team forces the issue, and by then the cost is already being paid. Today's guest brings an unusually layered perspective on this because he has lived high performance from both sides of it. My guest is David Walden, who is director at Stanton Chase with more than 15 years of global leadership advisory and executive search experience. David is a former public company chief people officer, and he partners with boards, CEOs, and executive teams to build the kind of leadership infrastructures that allow organizations to grow sustainably and navigate real transformation. His operating background spans publicly traded companies, high-growth technology organizations, private equity-backed environments, and global enterprises navigating rapid change, including a recent role as chief people officer at a global cybersecurity AI leader with thousands of employees across nearly 30 countries. What makes him the right voice for this conversation, anchored in recovery for performance, is the other half of his story. David is a former competitive swimmer and collegiate coach. He has served as an assistant coach in the swimming programs at the University of Louisville and Auburn University. And during his time at Auburn, he was part of a national championship winning team and coached multiple Olympic swimmers. Swimming, as he will tell you, is a sport without a real off-season, which means the question of how to build sustainable performance is not a theoretical one for him. He has lived it in the water, he has coached it on the deck, and he now brings that same lens into the executive teams he advises. David, welcome to Still Evolving. I'm really glad to have you here.
Thanks, Amy. Glad to be here.
David, I really was excited for this conversation because of your background in two high performance areas, both in sport and then, of course, in executive leadership. You've coached and competed in swimming in some of the highest levels, if you will. And that is a sport that does not have a real off season. If people are familiar in sport, oftentimes in America, we think of football where college football camp starts in August and the bowl games hit in December and January, and then everybody takes a break. But with swimming, that's not the case. So I'm curious, in your experience in competing and coaching in the sport of swimming, what did that experience teach you about being able to sustain performance that now you can take directly into the corporate world?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. And it's a tough sport, period, because of the nature. And there are other Olympic sports, especially, that have long seasons. But you really do have not much of a downtime, and any downtime can really set you back. And the calendar is pretty packed. So, I think from the standpoint of an athlete and a coach, the realistic objectives of like, here's our cycle, here's our plan, and being able to look at that holistically and say where we need to be, exceeding our performance, hitting our milestones. And then building in those little milestone breaks, whether they're micro breaks, recoveries, whether it's set during the weeks, quarters, whatever those are, so that you can build in some times to downshift, but not necessarily take your foot off the gas completely. And so I think that's really where I've always tried to take things from a coach, but also into workplaces. Is rest and recovery is important, but it doesn't always look the same. It doesn't mean a beach vacation. It can just mean, right, I need half a day to focus on one task. Otherwise, I'm going to just get distracted. Or it's going to be, hey, take a, plan to take a micro break during the day to walk the dog or something, right? Or get outside, or just stretch your legs, take a coffee with a friend. There's different ways to build that in, and understanding what's going to work for you is really important. But so I think from the perspective of coaching, high performing athletes, and looking at executives, I try to take the same lens, right? You have to try to make sure there's a balance, but that balance is different for everybody, and it's right, also based on that time capacity you have. So.
Absolutely. I appreciate how we can perhaps take a step back. In private industry, we always think of like perhaps quarterly metrics or performance goals, certainly annual goals that we might have. And if we take that lesson learned, as you were describing in sport, it's broken even further down, right? And down to the deliberate practice or rehearsal of a specific skill that we know will increase the likelihood that we will hit that outcome goal later. I share with everyone, there's not a coach I've ever worked with that sat down and had to state our goal is to win a championship. Like that's understood, right? Like of course our goal is to win. So that rigid focus on results can really actually serve as a distraction away from what are those process points that you were describing? What is that plan? And recovery is a component of that, that will increase the odds that when that day comes, that moment comes, that we are able to fully execute all that we are looking to perform.
Yeah, and I love I love what
Well,
you said there, because I think it's just it is taking that view of like, yeah, look, there's the end game. We know what we're trying to achieve, and for swimmers or for Olympic athletes, you've got that 4-year plan, right? It's pretty obvious.
right.
I want to be driven for a gold medal, but in that like 4 years, even like you just talked about with quarterly objectives, QBRs, however business wants to measure their cadences, reporting to the street, like you can then backtrack again and just go into smaller and smaller chunks to get down to your weekly cadence. And I think that those sort of breakdowns really help people focus on what's important at that time, knowing that you've got one eye on today and one eye on the horizon. And that's how you can balance that need for results versus what you have to execute on a day-to-day basis, whether that's rest recovery or it's deliverables.
Absolutely. I also think it helps to mitigate that risk of your people just putting in the hours for the sake of the hours, right? Like,
Right.
how are we being very deliberate? Like in sport, we talk about deliberate practice, right? You're not just going to go to swim practice. Like you go into that rehearsal with a very deliberate plan so that you can maximize the amount of time you're in the pool, for example, or you're doing your dry land workout, or you're in the, weight room, right? Like there's a very specific thing that you are working on, that you're repping. Where we see in private industry, sometimes it's, kind of taken as like this badge of honor of like, oh yeah, started at 5, I didn't get done until 8, but then when you kind of take a look at it, how much more productive somebody who maybe he started at 7:30 and wrapped at 4, like they may actually had been much more productive and bringing value and just then logging the hours. I'm curious, what have you seen from effective leaders in private industry that have helped kind of that line between holding people accountable and then being able to just work those hours?
Yeah, and clearly this doesn't work for every role or every person, right? Because clearly there is a
Right.
correlation between some roles physically the more they do, the more they produce, the more a company will, get revenue or earn. So it makes sense that sometimes, yeah, you don't have that, that ease to say, well, I'll just take my foot off the gas. No, like extra widgets means extra, dollars. But there are, other roles and needs for people to be able to produce their best and have the mental capacity and space to do that work. And so I think, again, it's really, when I think about the coach and athlete relationship, you know, there are times where the coach is sort of saying like, this is what we need to do, but most of the time it is a collaboration, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
this is what I believe we need to do. Are you signing up with this? And the athlete is sort of getting on board with the plan, but the athlete also comes with, I know my body, I know how I'm feeling today, I know what's going on, and I've also got to carry my performance into this training. So there has to be a communication between athlete and coach to be able to say, is today the right day to push? Or have we
Mm-hmm.
built enough recovery? Have we done the right things this week? Are we on track? How are you feeling? So there has to be that communication. And I think the best leaders have the same kind of approach. Here are all the goals, here are the things we need to accomplish, but let's make sure that we're having a clear communication between one another on what needs to be actually achieved. Now, I think that sometimes, like you said, there's a sort of need for leaders to say, well, I've got an employee, I need to make sure I get every hour out of them that's possible, because that's a resource cost. Well, think about it a little bit differently around actual deliverables versus hours worked, right? And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
what people get distracted by, is keeping a really tight focus on what are we trying to get out, what are we trying to deliver, is the quality at the right level, and making sure there's a space for that person to deliver that work. That's the true conversation, is really more about the deliverable than it is about how long it takes to get some work done, or how much time you're sitting at your desk doing stuff. So
really that ideal state is very, very much a team, right? Like there's the leader or the coach, right? And the athlete, or the leader and the individual contributor or teammate, who are working together to best support in accomplishing that mission. And then of course, taking care of your people along the way. There's a lot of trust, but there's also a lot of communication. Like there has to be a willingness to be able to directly communicate, this is what we need. This is where we're going in terms of that deliverable. And then the conversation from the teammate to be able to say, to your point, like, this is where I can go with it. These are my capabilities, or these are my concerns, or this may be my constraints. And then truly working together to try to resolve and find a new way, find a path to that deliverable. You've mentioned recovery a good bit. And as you started the conversation, you highlight, and I very much appreciate this, that it doesn't have to come in the form all the time of like a 2-week vacation. I think we're trying to educate around the role of micro breaks, the role of physical activity, the role of sleep, the roles of nutrition or hydration. When, in your experience in private industry, when an organization won't build in that recovery from that top down, what advice or what guidance would you give to individual leaders or contributors, and how they could perhaps take the reins and manage that for themselves?
Yeah, I think this is a really hard one, because I think a lot of times the power is definitely in the organizations and the leadership over the individual potentially feeling the same. They have the option here. But I think that most leaders, most good leaders, strong leaders, they appreciate people coming with a plan, not with the problems, right? So I think I always try to advocate for, look, if you are struggling, or yourself, your body, how work's going, come with a plan on how to best achieve the results that are being asked of you. Again, this is the coach athlete relationship. If it's like, look, you want me in the office 5 days a week, that's great, but I'm getting hit with constant interruptions. There's lots of side projects I'm getting pulled into. The key deliverable I'm not being able to focus on. Then the conversation needs to be, I need X amount of time to deliver this work. That means that I really need each week 4 hours a day where I'm uninterrupted, and I do that best in a meeting room downstairs, or I do it best from home, or I do it best from a different location. Like, do what is going to make sense, but then sort of communicate that and work with the manager to be like, look, I just need to take every day 20 minutes to clear my head. I'm going to go for a walk. It's got to be little things that are going to help the person do and execute the work, but also make sure that the leader, the manager, understands where the person's coming from. Because I think that's where the challenges always break down, with this idea that I have to see you in an office to know that you're working. It's the lack of comms and lack of tangible ways to measure deliverables. And so I think if someone is being much more upfront and much more communicative with their team, their leader, their manager, and vice versa with the employee, then everybody can build that trust so that the work's getting done and it's being done in the best way for that person. I think there's lots of studies that have been, over the years, getting better and better around how many different people learn differently. I think it's all very, obvious to us now, and that seems to have to translate to the same in the workplace, right? Not everybody can work the same way, and so we'll have to be flexible. But I'm not saying, oh, let things slide. I'm just saying, still focus on the deliverables. It's really about how that work gets done in a manner that everybody feels is working and everyone's positive about.
It is somewhat reminiscent of when I was working in sport, probably in the, I guess, between 2005 and 2010. This is where you saw the advancement of wearable devices and objective data measurement, right? Yeah. So to inform the impact of training load, to impact recovery, to and certainly the output. And during that time, more and more conversation evolved around coaching, given that data set and understanding the individual, coaching for that individual. And the rebuttal to that was, well, how can you do that without I guess letting people off the hook, or, like, oh, playing favorites. Oh, well, they don't have to do that today because their data said this, that, and another thing. And so it kind of reminds me a bit of that of, can we shift our thinking to our mission is to accomplish X, whatever that X is. And to be successful, in accomplishing the mission, that is defined by getting to the X and taking care of our people. So what that path looks like, to your point, it may be one individual needs an hourly reset. I just need to step away for 5 minutes and close my eyes and breathe and not deal with people, right? Yeah. It may be somebody else needs a walk to the water cooler and be able to have the casual chit chat about what happened this past weekend, right? To something very social. And then 1,000 other things in between, right? Like that, the individual differences there, to your point. But really, it does require a bit of a shift. And I would argue like some nuance where you are still holding accountable as a leader where we are going in the mission that we are here to achieve. And we are taking care of our people to be able to execute that consistently over time.
Yeah. I mean, there's been lots of really good studies about how, America, for example, has one of the lowest like vacation time off rates anyway in the world, not to mention the fact that, we underutilize that vacation time as well. And so I think it's really clear that we don't take the time we need. And I think that there's, again, everybody should know themselves a little bit about how they, I get hangry, right? When I haven't eaten, I get a little bit cranky. We've got to know how that feels, not just on a daily basis because I'm late eating some food, my blood sugar's off, but it's got to be like, wow, I've been burning the midnight oil, working a lot of time, and I just need just a day. And we have to not feel like you talked about the badge of honor of working countless hours. It's got to be a little bit different. We've got to have a badge of honor around success metrics. Like I did that. I was successful in what I needed to accomplish. And there is definitely a perception challenge of like, oh, well, if someone's getting treated differently. But I think that this goes back to also like, let's be really open on what we're trying to accomplish as a team, as an individuals, like, and be able to have more shared goals, more communication around what's happening in the business so that people understand like, oh, we're all trying to get done the work that needs to happen. So it's not just about one person getting some lenient time off or something. It's not. It's about, again, different people executing work in different ways and finding ways to recover themselves. So,
absolutely. I have used the phrase like what got you here won't keep you here, right? In this very fast-paced, dynamic condition in which we're all living and working, being able to adapt to perhaps the societal challenge, perhaps to the individual needs of your team members, or perhaps even with maybe a business iteration, right? Like, and what we're delivering or how we're delivering it. That flexibility, that adaptability is such a significant tool to be able to perform at a high level and continue to do so over time. What have you seen in effective leadership, like leaders that you've seen kind of in this very dynamic, fast-paced environment? How have you seen them evolve along, perhaps maybe with the business model, but how they're leading? How are they iterating their leadership to be able to be as effective over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things you said there are really important. And one, I think, stems from the time that we're out in the business workplace. Execution risk is at a new high, I would say, from the standpoint of we're doing our day-to-day work, but we now have AI integrated into our workflows, new tools, new technologies, roles changing and evolving, based on the new AI technologies. But those technologies are themselves moving very fast. This is not a time where it's like, well, we need leaders to learn skills like, oh, learn Excel. Once you've mastered Excel, you can use it. This isn't like this anymore because, Claude and other models, they're evolving so fast every day that the skills that they have and the skills that you did have, those are changing. You can't just accomplish like, oh, I now know how to use some kind of LLM, right? It's not how it works. So what we have to look for in leadership traits, in my opinion, today is people that are constantly inquisitive. You've got to always
Mm,
have a desire to want to learn. And with that, though, you have to have some degree of patience because what's happening today in businesses, we're launching a lot of initiatives around AI technology changes, role changes, how we deliver work for clients, for businesses. The product
mhm,
looks different now than it did previously. It's not just time and materials, it's now about what's the deliverable. So we have to be a little bit flexible on how this is happening because we're testing. And not all of these
mm,
things are, realizing the value yet today. So we have to be patient on that. We have to be patient with people because people are in flux trying to learn this as much as leaders are, where leaders are being pushed to realize the value and execute. And so,
mhm.
when I think about leadership traits today, there is a real challenge on the senior folks being seen as like, well, they've got all the answers when they don't. And I think they have to
Right.
be okay with saying, yep, I don't have the answers, but I'm learning, I'm still evolving. We're going to try this. We're going to be patient on the results. But somehow you've also got to bank in here. We've got day-to-day work still to deliver. So while the business is trying to
Right.
evolve and people are changing their roles, they've still got to hit their day-to-days, which all
Mhm,
comes back to putting that stress on the system because at the moment folks are saying, well, hey, look, different functions aren't necessarily needed in the future. Are people going to have jobs? Yeah, they're still going to have jobs because look at what's happening. More so than ever, you need
mhm,
people to be able to help with the systems, help to check that the work being done is accurate. You now need people to interpret that work better, and you need people who are going to help get the best out of the people that are trying to drive these transformations. So I think leadership right now is in a really tough spot. They're being
mhm,
placed in
mhm.
the middle of many different paths being pulled in different directions. And yeah, I think that this whole conversation about recovery, they're only going to get the best out of someone if they're able to bring their A game to work. But yeah, going back to what you asked,
Absolutely.
I think leaders today, they need to be learning, empathetic, and patient while they're driving these changes.
Absolutely. And speaking of recovery, that word recovery for performance, it could mean many things, right? We think about the role of sleep and active recovery. We also think of the role of nutrition, how we're fueling our systems with what we're eating, certainly our hydration, even supplementation. But we also think of recovery with regards to physical, how we can, our aerobic capacity, for example, is really critical in our ability to manage stress. So as I close, I ask every guest to share back, like, what do you do? What have you found that perhaps in your daily or weekly routine that has helped you sustain your performance over the long haul? What helps refuel you, perhaps? What does that recovery practice perhaps look like, or even another practice that helps your motivation?
Um, yeah, again, this works differently for everybody,
Yeah.
but I'm a big proponent on sleep. So I do like to get to sleep early because I like to get up early and get my day going. So I believe in, a good amount of sleep, and I try to tell I've got teenagers. I try to make sure that they try to get as much sleep as they can too. And you can tell the difference when people are rested.
Yeah.
But I do also try to make sure that for me, I get my balance of I need to be able to exercise and stay hydrated all the time. And that's an important part for me. So I try to then look at the same kind of way I would work a system with an athlete. Okay, look at the next few weeks, I've got these things coming up. I know that it's going to be really stressful here, here, and here. So I've got to
Yeah.
make sure that, if I'm going to be able to go and see one of my kids, play a sporting event, or, I'm going to drop them off at school, I build in time for those activities as well as bring space for myself. So I try to plan
Mhm.
ahead to know where the workload's coming, and so I can be prepared for the peaks and troughs. And similar to coaching and athlete communication, I just make
Yeah.
sure I talk to my family about what's going on too, so that we have realistic expectations on, hey, I can't make this week, or I talk to my wife about what she's gonna, where can we trade off on pickup offs and drop offs. And once you have that security, then you have the space to then execute what you need to do once you're all aligned.
Mhm.
So For me, I always
Absolutely.
find that's the best way to make sure that I feel comfortable, is that if everybody's in the know and I get, my space as much as everybody else's space.
Love it. David, thank you so much for sharing. I very much appreciate your insights, and also I'm learning from you today. So thank you for joining me on Still Evolving.
Thank you. Appreciate it.